Reactive training systems.
So a question that pops up a lot is always about pivot blocks. And it seems like there's always a lot of confusion around pivot blocks. How do you develop a pivot block? What are the goals of a pivot block, and so on? I would say one thing that gets confused a lot is that a pivot block is a deload. And it kind of fits that bill a little bit. It's I think a little bit of a simplistic way to think about this training period is just as a deload, but it's not a bad start. So when I prescribe a pivot block, what are my goals for that? Well, my first goal is to reduce fatigue, and in that sense, it is the same as a deload. But a pivot block goes a lot further beyond that. So the first goal is to reduce fatigue. The second goal is to resensitize the lifter to the training stimulus. So think about it this way. You come in on Monday morning and you squat. And then the next Monday you come in and squat, and then you squat, and then you squat, and every Monday is squat day, squat day, squat day, squat day. And even in the course of a development cycle, it's the same squat session on repeat. It's as though you go into a loud factory. And at first, the noise is loud. It's even close to overwhelming, right? But you stay in there for a period of time, and gradually you kind of desensitize to it until you're basically just tuning it out. And then if there's a change to the pitch or the volume of that noise, then it comes back to your awareness. It's a novel stimulus again. And I think of it in a similar way with training, that you're doing the same stimulus a lot, and even if we're changing some minor things like, the last block was 75% and this block is 85%, we're still squatting, it's still going to take roughly the same amount of time. The warm-up's going to be the same. The environment's going to be the same. You're looking at the same things. I think there's kind of a stagnation to that stimulus. One of the goals of the pivot block is to shake that up. So you want to change those stimuli in a pretty big way, so that it's novel, and not just so that it's novel in the pivot block, but so that it creates some separation from this thing that you're always doing. You probably, if you squat on Monday, you probably do that for a reason, and you wouldn't want to just squat any old day. People kind of, powerlifters especially, I think, develop their patterns and their ways of doing things. So I think mixing that up in the pivot block helps you keep from having to mix it up in the development block too often. So second goal, resensitize the lifter to training, the training stimulus. In part, that's this type of change where we're going to change movements, we're going to change intensities, we're going to change training structure. We're going to do things in a fashion that's a lot different from what you would do in a normal training period. The third goal, and I would say at this point they're kind of in no particular order, we want to include movements that are pretty much neglected in the course of a normal development cycle. So things that you don't get time to do, you intend to do, but you always get busy, and it just kind of gets shoved off your plate. So you want to include those during the pivot block. So I'm talking about, movements to train abs. A lot of times rows get pushed off and neglected. But basically anything that's a movement pattern that is not normal for you. So movements in the frontal plane are a good one. Rotational movements are a good one. These are things that I feel helps keep you balanced overall, and probably helps keep you a well-rounded and hopefully healthy athlete in a longer term. It's good to include those somewhere, and since they get neglected a lot during the development period, including them in the pivot just kind of makes sense. The fourth goal is to maintain your strength. You want to make to the maximum extent possible with respect to the other goals. You want to be able to maintain your strength. You're not going to be able to maintain it 100%. That's fine. That's to be expected. You just don't want it to be in free fall during this pivot period. And then the last goal is energy system related. Doing some work that's, basic aerobic work. A lot of times for powerlifters, it comes back to this basic aerobic work. This is a great period for that. It's not extensive. It's not gonna make you great at aerobic work, but hopefully it'll make you not the worst at aerobic work, and you'll have some better capacity in your normal training. Your recovery will be just a little bit better. And again, our aim is just to not have your aerobic abilities in total free fall, where you go for a couple years and neglect all these capabilities. So those are kind of the 5 goals of a pivot. Now, there's so many ways that you can solve all these problems at once. There's so many ways that you can construct a training period that solves all these problems, and they just look vastly different from each other. And that's good, because that in itself helps to solve the problems, because it goes back to the sensitivity to training, right? As far as reducing fatigue, kind of my go-to for that is to cut the training workload by about half. It's not necessarily the training volume, it's the training stress, really. And I know I need to get to that video on stress indexes, but you want to reduce the training load by about half. And then what's remaining, you're going to distribute that among the other goals. So what I find a lot of times is that I'll take the competition exercise and swap it out for a close variation. So maybe your competition squat turns to a high bar squat, or maybe a safety bar squat, or something very close, but uses a little bit less weight. And then we're going to train it for fairly low intensity, high reps. So that's where a lot of my athletes find their high bar 10s. So they're doing high bar squats for sets of 10 or something like that. And they hate it, but I don't think they really hate it that much. Powerlifters love to hate their training. I think it's a different movement. It's different enough to be this novel stimulus. After that, what are we looking to do? We're looking for variety. We're looking for novelty in terms of movement pattern, energy systems, and neglected muscle groups. I mean, you could solve that with a circuit. You could, make one circuit that kind of covers those bases and then work your way through that. You could solve it, one movement at a time. I end up prescribing a lot of weird tempos during pivots as well. There's just so much that you can do, and it's really a period where you can kind of let the creativity flow a little bit, but in a little bit of a different way. So during the development block, we get so focused on what is it that's going to drive the athlete response? What is it that's going to make the athlete better? And that's good, that's necessary in those development periods. But in the pivot, it can be different, because you have all these other goals, they're secondary goals, they're easier to achieve. And then you can start to ask the question, like, what is it that's going to be kind of fun for the athlete? Maybe in a kind of a weird way. I'm not sure that 5-3-0 tempo work is fun, but in a way it is. You try new things, novel movements. If If you've never done front squats with a duffalo bar and you want to give that a try, then hey, a pivot's a great time for that. Or you've got in mind an exercise that you might want to do during a development block, but you don't know if the exercise is going to be, if it's going to, not even if it's going to work for you, but if it's going to be a viable option for you. Maybe give it a try during a pivot and just kind of test the waters a little bit. What I intend to do at this point is to link this video back to an article or something like that, and I'll post up an example of what a pivot looks like, kind of a typical generic example. But I'm almost reluctant to do that because I'm concerned that it'll stifle this creative opportunity that you've got. Because you can take this and really try a lot of different things. There's a real possibility here for you to come up with something that's completely unique to anything that I might come up with. And if I show you what I've developed, that may stifle your creative flow here. So at the same time, I understand that it helps a lot to have an example to look at. So this is an issue that I'm personally kind of wrestling with right now, but we'll get it sorted and hopefully get you an example to look at for a pivot block. But really want to hammer home that it's an opportunity to do things a lot different than you would during a normal development period, and that's good. You should embrace that and hopefully use that as an opportunity.
Reactive Training Systems.